siyanqula ngomoya wovuyo kungekho zikhalo abantwana bentlalo yekomkhulu nesibonda iinkonde zesizwe ezikhokhela umnombo ngesiko lobudoda iinkondekazi ezikhaphela iintsapho zisiphulula amanxeba zisithuluka izilonda hlobo lokusiphilisa siyaphila oomakhi abakha isizwe ngolwimi bezama ukusimilisa siyamila kwiminyanya ethi isikhaphele ikwasikhokela siphile kudeda ubumnyama siyanqula abantu abadala kodwa masenzi igogogwane elingenagama.
Thokozani, ka lebitso ke Kgontse Kwapeng, also known as Gogo Ndabezinhle. I am a spiritual healer, spiritual empath, and a spiritual mentor. Kajeko will be talking about mental health in the spiritual space. Ba bangata batho ba eleng hore they are diagnosed with depression, anxiety, but it's also a misdiagnosis again. How be o na le a spiritual calling. We also find that batho ba bang ba ya go the traditional healers or spiritual healers at that and asked the questions, oh, this is what I'm going through, this is what is happening, and later diagnosed who they have a calling. It may be correct, but is that the only diagnosis? That could not be the only diagnosis, because they suffer from psychological ill health, where unale depression or unale anxiety, and you find yourself in a situation where all of those things were symptoms of you having a calling. Now that is what we're going to look at. Ribue kayona and actually see hore hantle what is it that we can do from a psychological perspective, which is the Western side, as well as the spiritual African side, where we come together and how do I deal with someone who has a calling? They're struggling from mental health. Or how do I deal with someone who has mental health issues, but then later picks up a spiritual calling that needs to be hid? At the age of 16, I was diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. I don't know anything about that at that time. I don't even know how did I get to a point where I diagnosed with that disorder. My parents took me to doctors. In actual fact, it presented itself as a physical ailment. So that is when I was then diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome, which after many tests, this is also anxiety related, and this is how anxiety yaga presents itself. Now I'm 16, I'm in high school, and having no recollection of how I even got to that space, because I was a bubbly kid and everything was fine. Suddenly, kinali anxiety. After a while, we then fast forward to Hakitla, Hola, and actually realize, okay, this is getting intense. I remember my first year in varsity, I had to do a presentation. And out of nowhere, I had a panic attack. And I was about to speak about a simple topic. After that, everything went downhill. And I actually started basking in this anxiety, not knowing what it was or how it came about. And you always have to find a reason. Hore, this is the reason I'm feeling this way. Because at that point, I did not understand what spirituality was. I did not know that I had a calling. And suddenly I have this Western diagnosis, anxiety, and it moved on to being depression. And fast forward age 26, when my calling now shows itself. And when it shows itself, kikadi doro, yes, kikadi visions, and there are episodes where and you're like, hey bo, why am I even crying? Only to find out that I have a spiritual calling. At that point, I have learned to live with my anxiety disorder. I have tried therapy, and not just one person. We had been to numerous people where my father actually tried okay, arizameng, and with the support of my mother as well, arizameng. How can we help you? Little did they understand about anything that had to do with psychological ill health. Understanding that they never had to actually experience anything that was psychological or anything that was an anxiety disorder or depression, because they used to keep everything inside. And suddenly they have this daughter who presents all the symptoms, who's been diagnosed with this disorder, and they don't know what to do. I must say it has been very difficult to experience all of that. And Hakiri, it has been very difficult. It still is difficult to this point. I have learned to now differentiate between ancestors coming up or to actually differentiating, is it anxiety coming up or is it what is really happening? And that is one of the things that Lefehlo has helped me deal with or actually understand, that Sidimu Saka sinali a way that it presents itself that is anxiety induced. So my gift giver, the first time she showed herself, I had a panic attack, and I remember I was at work and I had to find a way to deal, and I just cried. You cry. People around you are wondering, has she started with her problems, or you don't know. And that is just the one thing that also added on to my anxiety. I was worried about what other people are going to say if I'm going to boldly speak about my anxiety disorder or even my calling. Because at some point, 26 is an age where a lot of people have discovered, I have a calling, and they've actually started embarking on it. And that was the beginning for me. Because like I said, an altar server, and that was my life until one day things changed. Mental health is a very difficult thing to speak about, let alone to deal with. And I find myself in situations sometimes where I am feeling overwhelmed by anxiety, and it could be induced by anything. And sometimes you want to close yourself up in a corner, and that's how I used to live. Where you close yourself up, you not talk about your feelings. And when I tried therapy, which didn't work, I tried numerous people until I found one therapist, Hakikena, in the room, and we were talking about how I actually have a calling. And I remember she said to me, just tell your ancestors to wait and you live your life. That is when I stood up and I walked out, not knowing and how am I going to get help. But it's also making a decision, we are going to work with my ancestors for a better me so that I become a better vessel. It has been an absolutely difficult journey, but one that I am learning to overcome. I am learning to get to some sort of destination. I'm still on the journey and I'm not sure where the destination is heading. Where I actually learn to deal with my anxiety. On other days I cry. On other days I am happy. On other days I am just sad. And you never even know why are you feeling this way, or why is it that you have this disorder. Because a lot of the time you ask yourself why when something goes wrong in your life. Why am I supposed to be going through all of this? And it had painted a picture of me being peculiar. So I was always strange, or I was never actually with a lot of people. So it was habui, but it was because you are being swallowed up by this monster that when I was at about, but having to initiate, that's when I learned hore. Maybe there is a difference, because you'll also find that batho ba eleng hore are diagnosed with schizophrenia, if you go and check out someone onang le calling, you'll find that they have the same symptoms as a person onang le schizophrenia, where you hear voices, where you see things, where you just are not in a normal state of mind. And those are the symptoms that spiritual healers have, or people who have a calling have. And this is why my studies of psychology, I took it upon myself to say, okay, maybe this is what I had to do to understand. At that time, maybe when I even decided, okay, I'm going to study psychology, I had just no recollection of all this anxiety happening. It was something, okay, I've attended a career counseling test, and the results it's people orientated, and maybe or seeing batho ba le in a better space than they would be if there was no intervention. But I found myself being interested in psychology and the studies of psychology to understand human behavior. And the added extra was that I was a spiritual person, which helped me further understand human behavior in the spiritual space. It helped me understand spirituality, combinedly a vessel that is being used, and how does that vessel deal with having been possessed by a spirit. The spirit wants you to do certain things, and then you come in with the psychology part of it, where you're not even coping, you're not even sure if you're making the right decision. And that is where I took it upon myself to say, as a spiritual mentor, yeah, we have initiates Selim Hore also have the same problem, yeah, mental health, and they find themselves where they don't know what are we going to do, how am I going to attend to this, how is it that this is spirituality, is it really my calling, hope, or I'm just being misdiagnosed with this illness, or I'm being misdiagnosed by being said I have a calling. Being a spiritual mentor means they have the same problem that I had. I actually do come across people by Hore are going through what I went through, or what I'm still going through. It becomes very difficult and sharing their story for you not to shed a tear, because you know exactly how it feels to go through your mental ill health and not knowing and ask for help as an SOS from someone or somebody who is listening, and ask for their help. Other than clients who actually go through all of this, we do come across initiates who also have the same thing. They have a spiritual calling as well as mental ill health. During the training, after numerous groups I took it upon myself to close the gap, or at least try to close the gap, by introducing modules that speak to human behavior, that speak to psychology, that speak to communication, that speak to the well-being ya rona as batho. Because before you are called, you are human, and when you have little understanding about who you are or what it is that makes you from a mental health perspective, then it becomes very difficult to want to venture into everything because you have little understanding. It also speaks to lack of coping, where you are not coping because you are struggling with your anxiety, there's a lot of things that happen. There's a lot of emotional strain, there's a lot of mental strain, there's a lot of physical strain, and you find yourself in a corner where you do not know what to do. And closing the gap, I then developed modules such as Psychology 101, Psychology and Spirituality, Communication 101, Conflict Resolution, as well as Anger Management. And those are the things that I saw where they'll be able to help our initiates be better people, understand their journey, and understand themselves and understand other people, because unfortunately you interact with a lot of spirit, you interact with a lot of people, and you then exchange energy. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of words said, there's a lot of understanding that still needs to take place, because everyone comes from a different background or has a different story to tell. But what I've seen that these modules do, they create a different understanding on how to cope and how to also redirect feelings that are maybe misplaced or that are uncomfortable to feel, how to redirect them, how to actually address the feelings still done or they are going to swallow me up. And so far it has worked, and we've seen a change in a lot of initiates because they are able to now deal with their anxiety, they are able to deal with their depression, and it really makes my heart feel better to know there's a difference that I am making to make sure maybe I didn't get that opportunity, but I can provide the same opportunity for someone, or maybe not the same opportunity, but an opportunity of someone who went through something like I did, but now they have a space where they can actually learn and be better people. The role that family plays in the life of someone that has a mental disorder combined with a calling is very important, because there needs to be a certain understanding that takes place. You are going to have to create a safe space as family for your child. This means going above and beyond and understanding what general anxiety disorder is. What medication does my child take? What is it that they need from me as a parent? I always look at TikTok videos that play, and there's always one that used to play, Barry, when your child goes to therapy or when you find out that your child is depressed, then the parents must always tiptoe or mock bana ba bona, because hey, utlo trigger when I start speaking like this. And unfortunately, that is the reality, that we lack the knowledge of the fundamental or the basis to mental ill health, that we struggle to understand when your child is going through the same thing. I remember my dad asking me the one time, Arkonna, is therapy actually helping? Do you need it? That on its own as a statement changed my mindset in wanting to get help from a therapist, because I knew maybe he did not understand what is happening with me, and maybe and now you are questioning, do they really want to do this? Do they really want to support me as their child? It is of paramount importance to have your child's back, especially high kopanili pitso ya badimo, because that on its own adds on to the stress, adds on to the anxiety, adds on to the depression. Because unfortunately, we live in a very unfriendly society, and we need to make sure as family that you guard your child, abe protected from the outside noise, at least for you to limit the outside noise, that bana ba lona are protected and they're in safe spaces and they can count on you. Wena motswadi, wena brother or sister, cousin, in fact, ebile the best friends and close people who they rely on you to be able to talk. Because it's enough for a person to go to therapy, but it's a fell somewhere. How to out of that therapy room, you are still faced with the real world, where it's not just four walls and you are face to face with your therapist and you're just talking and you're pouring your heart out because you know this is a safe space. How out or from that therapy room, I want to be able to feel comfortable to talk to my mom, to talk to my dad about what I'm going through, without thinking, oh, I need to stand at the top of a building somewhere and jump, or taking a razor and start cutting myself because I need an outlet, and my family is not here to hear me out when I need to speak to them. So family plays a very huge part in the well-being yabana balona from a psychological perspective, from a spiritual perspective. It sometimes even means taking further steps to want to learn about spirituality, to want to know about batho ba ko lona and ba sebetsa jwang and who are they, so that you understand hore this body that holds all these ancestors can have a comfortable landing sometimes in family, in parents, ba eleng hore they will understand and ba tla phumula meyogo ya bana ba bona when things don't go right. For everyone who has walked the path of healing of their mental ill health, I wish you well, and hotata, because sometimes you do not have the support, sometimes you do not have someone holding your hand, sometimes you have people around you that don't understand because they've never seen it happen or they've never experienced it. But it's never the end of the world when you realize, oh, I have a calling, or I've just been diagnosed with anxiety or depression. As a matter of fact, you could have both. And I'm a walking example of having a calling and also battling with general anxiety disorder. But it's never the end of the road. It's always the will of wena wanting to heal, wanting to work at it, wanting to do the work, even on days when you don't want to. But it's about taking a stand and wanting to be better, so that you can, spread the daisies out into the world and share your light into the world. Because a lot of people, in as much as hubuiwa kayona, in as much as we are acknowledging that we have it, a lot of people hit brick walls when it comes to having to find solutions of finding a way to deal with it, finding a way to deal with your spirituality. And you have people around you that you can turn to when things get hard, when you feel like you can't cope, when you feel like you can't take it anymore. That is the time when you need to reach out to anyone who is willing to give a helping hand, to have a listening ear, just so that you release the pain that you are feeling. Those who are members and families that this person that may be going through this difficult journey and may be diagnosed with this disorder, it is important to always support those that you love. It is important to want to spare their lives and assure them and affirm them that, sometimes but when they feel the love that comes from you, best believe that can save a life. I wish everyone well in their journey of healing. I wish everyone well in their spiritual journeys. Thokozani.